Welcome everyone to the Modernising Energy Data Access competition briefing event here in London. My name is Jenny McDonald from the Knowledge Transfer Network, and I'm hosting this event on behalf of Innovate UK with my colleagues Louise Jones and Stefan Eldred as well. So if you need any help during the day, any questions about what you've seen, then come and talk to one of us, and we have these nice attractive lanyards on. Welcome also to the people on the webcast. Stefan will be your moderator today, so if you have any questions as you're watching the presentations, then please just type those in on the webcast and Stefan will be able to answer those questions for you at the Q&A. Okay, so before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. There's no fire drill planned for today, so if the alarms go off, it's the real thing. So we'll make our way out back through the door you've all come in through, and we're quite close to the fire exit, you'll be pleased to know. So just to the right-hand side of the coffee station is the fire escape, and we'll meet outside. Because we are recording this, so we don't have any interruptions during the presentations, please can I ask you all to put your phones on silent if you haven't already. And then finally, the toilets, if you need them, I'm sure you will at some point, they're down by the lifts where you arrived on at this floor. I think the ladies are on this floor, the men's are on the next floor up. Okay, so today's agenda. This may be a little bit different to what you saw on the reminder email. We've had to tweak things around a little bit. We're first of all going to have an introduction to the Prospering from the Energy Revolution programme. This is the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund programme that is funding today's competition. So we want to sort of set the scene and explain the kind of goal of that programme and how this fits with it. You'll then hear about today's competition, the detail of what we would like you to do for us as part of this competition. And then we have a presentation on policy and regulation around energy data and how it's accessed and what work has already been done in this area, just to bring you right up to date before you apply. Because this is an SBRI competition rather than a grant, that has slightly different rules around it. So we're going to have a presentation on the differences between a grant and an SBRI, which is more like a contract. And how you go about applying, how you actually apply online for the competition. And then at that point, you can ask as many questions as you like about anything that you've seen this morning. So store up all those questions and we'll have a good long session there where you can ask your questions. We'll break for a quick networking break at that point. If you would like to having seen all the competition scope, if you would then like a 10-minute chat with one of the funders, so either Innovate UK, BEIS or Offgems, you can go to the welcome desk where you've got your name badges from and sign up to have a chat at lunchtime with them. So do that at the first break if you'd like to have a chat with them at lunchtime about your project idea, just to check that what you are thinking of will be in scope for the competition. At that point as well, if you haven't already, it's a good idea to pop up your company profiles, your Give-Get cards that were sent out last week. If you haven't had time to fill one in, we also have some blank ones again on the welcome desk. They're a great way of telling everybody in the room what you have to offer and what you're looking for. It helps you to find partners for this if you want partners. It also helps us after the event. If somebody comes to us and says, I'm looking for this particular skill, having that information about you allows us to match you up quite efficiently, we think. After the networking break, we'll then have a presentation in a bit more detail about the solution that we're looking for. And then finally, I'll do a very quick talk about how the KTN can help you, again, to find partners, reviewing proposals, that type of thing, before we then break for lunch. And I'll go into more details when we get to that point about where you go for one-to-ones and the rest of it. So that's how it's looking for today. Hopefully that is what you were expecting. We'll now start with our first presentation by Matt Hastings from Innovate UK, who's going to tell you about Prospering from the Energy Revolution.
Great, thank you Jenny, and good morning everyone, to those in the room and those on the webcast. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm at Hastings. I'm an Energy Systems Innovation Lead at Innovate UK. Innovate UK is part of UK Research and Innovation. If you're not familiar with UKRI, we are a culmination of about 7 different research councils and Research England on the research side and Innovate UK on the innovation side. Really excited about this competition. I think there's going to be a huge amount of detail and information to follow, but on behalf of Offgem and BEIS and us, we think this is a massive enabler to future growth in this space. So we're excited to show you a little bit more about it. Just before we get started, quick show of hands. How many energy bods have we got in the room? If you're sort of energy industry associated, so about 60% for those on the webcast. So non-energy digital, are you sort of digital? So about the other 40%, great. And other TBC, we'll meet at the coffee break. Hopefully a bit of everything in there. So that's great. Okay, so just to explain a little bit about the different roles then between the agencies that are in front of you today. So Innovate are funding the competition. This is a £1.9 million competition set across 3 different phases. It's an SPI competition, and Derek's going to explain a bit more about that later, what that means. Offgem are the really kind of core advisor within this work, and it's worth saying that we as a team have been working together on this for at least the last sort of 4 months, and it builds on what was done by the Energy Data Task Force, which some of you may be familiar with. I know Dinka's probably going to allude to that a little bit during his talk. And who's the actual customer of this contract which we're developing? Well, it's BEIS. So this isn't an innovation competition without a customer. This is a contract with a very clear customer, which to me is a very important part of it. Moving on to Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund then. So some of you might be familiar with this. For those who aren't, the ISCF, as it's called, has these 5 core foundations. It's really there to ensure great ideas are brought forward. We create incredible capabilities in the people of the UK economy. We build infrastructure in a way that we've never done to this extent before, and really make the UK the best place to do business in the world, whilst also growing very prosperous communities and places. There are these 4 kind of key challenge areas, if you like. So AI and data, future of mobility, clean growth and ageing society. And what you're going to hear about today really sits within the clean growth part of the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. So if we break that clean growth piece down a little bit more, we've got the Prospering from the Energy Revolution Challenge, which is the blue highlighted box on the slide. We've got £103 million, which we're deploying across a number of different areas. I'll talk about those in a sec. But we form part of this broader Wave 2 challenge, and with Wave 3 about to launch shortly as well, we've got everything in there, from quantum technologies to AR and VR through audience of the future, food production, new construction techniques and healthy aging. So it's a very broad and ambitious programme, the ISCF in its entirety. So in terms of Prospering from the Energy Revolution, or as PIFA, we love an acronym in Innovate. So the PIFA programme, the opportunity is really around reducing costs. So we want to reduce costs to serve within the overall sector, and in so doing create a brand new kind of digital ecosystem in order to leverage new opportunities within this space. We want the UK to be the powerhouse, not just within Europe, but within the world when it comes to energy sector exports, whether it's kind of digital or data or anything around the broader sector as a whole. And crucially, we want to bring in finance. So one of the other hats that I wear in Innovate is around investor relations, and we're doing a lot to bring in investors into this energy systems space and trying to move the investment community to consider funding local systems in a way that they might traditionally invest in wind or solar or storage or whatever it may be. There's also a big localism focus within the PIFA programme. So whilst there is a national export ability here, we really want to see local communities prosper, and that's why local energy systems are so key to what we're trying to achieve. And consumers. Let's not forget that one of our biggest customers of this entire programme is really UK PLC's customers, and we're trying to drive down the costs of energy in quite ambitious and exciting ways. So how about the objectives of the programme as a whole then? Well, we've got 4 core objectives. we want to prove that these business models that we're developing through Prospering from the Energy Revolution are investable and scalable, that can be scaled throughout the 2020s and beyond. Alongside that, we want to unlock about 10 times future private investment. So somewhere in the region of £900 million we want to see injected into local energy systems over the course of the next decade, and really try and accelerate new products and services to commercialization. So as Innovate, our role is really at the far end of the technology readiness scale. We want to see commercialization and businesses grow and succeed globally off the back of what we're doing here. And I mentioned the UK leadership point already, but it's nice to have BEIS and Offgem here kind of leading the charge on a lot of this stuff too, which is great to see. So some of the key components of the Energy Revolution programme are around integration, so heat, power and mobility together in a single systemic proposition, if you like, fully integrated for consumer value and consumer benefit in scalable and replicable investment models. So we want to kind of make local energy systems a cookie cutter proposition, which can just be rolled out, invested in, scaled up in the same way that large-scale solar or onshore wind or offshore wind or whatever it may be has been done on a sort of technology basis. So what about the programme specifically? So this is how the 103 million kind of breaks down. We've got quite an ambitious set of demonstrators running at the moment. So we've got 4 demonstrators running across the UK, 1 up in Orkney, 2 in Oxfordshire, and 1 down in the southeast as well. They are demonstrating local energy systems in practice, so you'll see heat, power, mobility integrated, lots of EVs, lots of batteries, lots of renewables, some really interesting flex markets and some new business models thrown in. We've then got a detailed designs programme, which is around 30 million. That closed last week, so we're just in the assessing those different applications at the moment. We've got some investment going into the Energy Systems Catapult at the moment to run a programme called the Energy Revolution Integration Service, and also an academic programme with about 33 academics called Energy Rev. It's a very broad programme. I've been at Innovate for about the last 5 months and just slowly starting to get my head around the kind of breadth of it all. So you'll be forgiven for not getting fully up to speed on exactly how all these different components interact. But outside of the key technologies competition, which is another part, which is really investing in the technologies which we feel are missing from the local energy landscape, we're here to talk about the Modernising Energy Data Access competition, which you might look at this 100 million quid and go, oh, there's only 2 million quid down here. Modernising energy data is possibly the single most important enabler to the future energy system that we have in this space. So don't look at the number and think, oh, this is just a little bit of money. I'm personally, and I know the team is as well, massively excited about what this competition could deliver. So, what's the scope? This isn't the scope, so don't worry. This is the long-term vision of where we feel that this market could head. So we see a kind of back-end architecture which is delivered through this Modernising Energy Data competition, which will enable essentially open data across multiple sectors. So we're looking at energy on the far left for the purposes of this competition, but we see really interesting innovations happening in the transport space, in the building space, and alongside weather data, demographic data, geospatial data, finance data, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. So we see this as a data analytics dream. You know, if you've got high-end machine learning capabilities that you can put to play on something like this, we see real tangible value dropping out at the end of it. And what are those 3 buckets of value? Essentially, we see a great opportunity for government to be more informed when it comes to setting future policy in this space. We see a great opportunity for the regulator and other regulators to collaborate and integrate kind of together to deliver more agile regulation in this space. And from a consumer's perspective, we see this development of real novel, innovative business models which, let's face it, haven't all really been invented yet. But that's why we're excited to talk to you guys who will be ultimately responsible for filling in the gaps of innovation which exist within this vision. Some of you might be looking at this going, this is a cybersecurity nightmare. So I just want to say a couple of words in terms of security. You know, our expectations with everyone who applies into this competition is that, you know, you are going to bake in security mindedness absolutely from the start. There's no accident that we're doing this presentation from Hatton Garden, which is the site of the UK's largest robbery. £14 million was stolen just down the road in one of the most audacious robberies of all time. When we talk about security mindedness, what we're really talking about here is kind of understanding and routine application, if appropriate, and proportionate security measures. You can tell that I'm reading this, but as any business situation, so as to deter and or disrupt hostile, malicious, fraudulent and criminal behaviours or activities. So don't just think about this from a cyber perspective, don't just think about this from a national infrastructure, critical national infrastructure perspective. You know, we're interested in making sure that you guys are thinking about how malicious threats could abuse this data if not managed properly. So it's really important to bake that in from the start. So, objectives of the competition. There's two core objectives. So we want to accelerate the development of tools and processes that can deliver the kind of back-end functionality to enable that vision to become a reality. And I love this phrase of just interoperability by design. So some of you, all of you will be aware that we've got vast different data sets, different formats, structures, all sorts of different stuff across the sector and other sectors as a whole. We have to create a way for those to talk together more efficiently and effectively. So that is your role as applicants into this competition. And the kind of outputs that we're looking at, yes, we want increased data visibility, we want ease of access, we want to see these different data sets absorbed and digested and made available collectively. We really want to make sure that consumers, businesses, users can search and access data based on their own sort of specific user needs. So it truly is a modernising energy data access competition in all of its form. So, next level of detail. This is how the phasing of the competition is going to work. There's a couple of really important points on here, so I'll just slow down and take a breath. This competition is 100% funded. So it's not like the usual competitions within Innovate UK where you have to find 50%, 60%, 70% match funding. It's 100% funding. That means it's going to be tough. We want it to be tough. We want it to be incredibly competitive because we want one company to be standing at the end of this who is the best company out of every one of those applicants. So phase one, everyone in this room and on the webcast and more broadly can apply into. We're going to select 3 winners, and when I say we, it'll be a combination of independent assessment as well as kind of Offgem, BEIS and ourselves. So we're looking for 3 winners to then deliver 3 discovery contracts. Each one of those contracts is about 160k each. Those projects will start in April 2020 and they've got 6 weeks. Now, we've got Paul and Stephen here from Offgem who can talk a lot about the government digital services kind of framework. Some of you might recognise that this comes off that, but really discovery contracts are about feasibility studies. So technical and commercial specs, detailed design packages and a test plan for the next phase. So the next phase is phase 2. So of those 3 companies, only 2 will be left standing. It feels a bit like Britain's Got Talent or something, doesn't it? So apologies for that, but I don't know who the Simon Cat. I know. I'll move on. With phase 2, you've got 3 months to deliver a series of different alpha contracts. So the alpha contract is 260 grand each, and that's really about developing a prototype and undertaking field testing. The team will supply you with a toolkit of data to play with as part of these different phases. But it's really where you get from phase 2 into phase 3 where we start to get into, you know, real meaty solution. So, sorry, phase 3 will only have a single winner. So phase 3 is a 900k contract to deliver a private beta which will ultimately have detailed field testing, real end users, real data. And the intention, and Dinka, maybe you can talk about this a little bit more, is that it doesn't just end after phase 3. We're not just going to cut you off and say thanks very much. The intention is that this becomes a productizable and commercializable piece of kit which can be demonstrated in the UK but also exported kind of globally. So big spoils for the winner. The project ends in March 21, so that's how long all of this fits together. I've talked about this a little bit, so I'm not going to linger on it too much, but it's just basically to explain, as part of the application process, when you get to the end of phase 1, you've got to do essentially a bit of a show and tell and a summary report. That report goes into an application for phase 2, so it's designed to be a very smooth and slick process. All of these slides will be made available offline as well, by the way, so you don't need to kind of scribble everything down. And this competition is now live via the Innovation Funding Service. So if you just Google search Innovation Funding Service and put data as the keyword, it's top of the list. So you'll be able to see this in a bit more detail. All of the documentation that you need for the SPRI process is on an FTP site. Derek's going to talk a bit more about that later. But you might be asking yourself, so why are we doing this as an SPRI and not as a normal funding competition? Well, I mentioned 100% funding. You know, it's important that we use that to bring in non-energy digital expertise into this space. It is a contract with deliverables and milestones, so you know you will be held to account for your solution in terms of what you actually deliver. We want it to be very competitive. You know, it is designed as such. So if you don't feel you've got world-leading capabilities in this space, don't apply. I've mentioned about BEIS being the customer. Excuse me. Anyone else got a really annoying cold and cough that they've had for like the last 6 weeks? Yeah. A couple of important points in terms of intellectual property. So the intellectual property will sit with you guys as the developers, but we are looking for this back-end architecture to be open source, in inverted commas. Don't freak out. Talking to some private companies, they freak out at the word open source. We will accept applications if you have a different view to what open source could look like. If you're doing fair and reasonable, non-discriminatory licenses that are freely exploitable, you know, we welcome your application, okay? So open source or similar in principle. And yes, we want it to interact with other potential parts of that vision, whether it's transport, construction, finance, etc., etc. So, I think that concludes my section. I just want to reiterate my excitement for this competition. This is absolutely essential that we get this right, and I'm really looking forward to seeing your applications come in. So thanks very much indeed. Dinka, over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Hello, everyone in the room and those joining on the webcast. So Matt, you really put it eloquently that this is a really important project for us, and we share the excitement that Matt hopefully conveyed to all of you. So I'll talk on 2 slides. It's essentially the point I want to make is that this is essentially a big change program, and it's a transformational change at that. And therefore, we need a vision, right? Like, why are we doing this? What are we really after? And essentially, the problem that we've identified is that a modern energy system is going to require an explicit consideration of the needs of data experts, and it's going to require sort of a preparation for allowing this data innovation to exploit the energy system and make it fit for the future. And to be able to do that, we can't have the usual suspects in the room, and we need to crowd in sort of innovation, and which is why the 60-40 split is encouraging, that it's not just people who think of, okay, another energy innovation project. This is more about looking at how data technology and the new insights that experts in the data field are developing can be applied to the energy space, and that's what we're really after. And if you haven't read the Energy Data Task Force report, I encourage you to read it. I think it's really interesting because it sort of explains the vision in more detail and sort of gives a few recommendations, which are a combination of principles, but also something tangible that we can do. And I think that should give a sense of why we're trying to do this. And this is a bit of a snapshot of what we've done so far. But again, trying to link it back to to the original task force report. Some of the people who worked on the report are here. I can see them. That's great. And essentially, there were 5 recommendations. 2 of them more principle-based recommendations, but 3 quite tangible, sort of action-oriented, almost digital products, so to speak. So we've made progress on all of them. I think there's a lot for the industry to do, which is why one thing which I felt Matt did not emphasize enough was that we need partnership. And it's not just for BEIS and Offgem to do, but we require the network companies, for example, and the ENA to be really involved with all of this and to make sure that they feel that there is combined and mutual value in them participating in this. Because there is going to be regulatory impetus on this, and therefore it makes sense for the networks to really align with what we're trying to do and contribute to how this develops and shapes up. But anyway, coming back to this, so on the principle-based regulations, I think what we are doing at BEIS and Offgem is almost making sure that we put our money where our mouth is and sort of leading by example and doing what we can with the limited data that, say, BEIS operates or a little more data that Offgem operates with to make that open and to show what we really want the industry to also follow in terms of quality and in terms of processes. So Offgem wants to do that, we want to do that, and we're doing a few things. And this is sort of emerging from that, where we're trying to use public funding to actually help accelerate that process of change. Then in terms of the 3 other sort of building block recommendations as the task force called them. So there was the data catalog recommendation, which is essentially trying to solve the problem of visibility of data, that the industry doesn't recognize or does not know what all data exists within the industry, and therefore there should be a central repository where all of this can be listed for people to interrogate and actually find out, like, this data exists, and if I interrogated this person, I could get access to the information that I require, and that enables maybe new business models which you previously thought were not possible because you didn't know that this information existed. So that data catalog idea is something that we're progressing. There is work going on. I can't make official announcements at the minute, but there is some progress happening, and hopefully we'll have something to share quite soon on that. Then there is the other recommendation is about developing a coordinated asset registration strategy, and that essentially is trying to solve the problem of, okay, right now we have a limited number of distributed energy resources on the grid, but that's going to proliferate. That's going to expand greatly when all of us have electric cars and heat pumps and solar PVs. And now in a post-subsidy world, there is no clear way of capturing this information. So how do we get that information? And it would be very difficult to sort of go and monitor that unless consumers are incentivized somehow to part with that information and to put it in a easily understandable and searchable format. And that's where this asset registration recommendation comes in, where how do we build a system that's user-friendly, but also has the right incentives for compliance. And whether that's through the stick of regulation or whether that's through the incentive of market participation, that is all TBC, but that's what we're trying to do. So, okay. And then the third recommendation, or the third building block, is around the digital system map, which is about essentially making sure that all this data is somehow has a spine, which is some sort of geospatial standard, which allows this information to also have a locational element, because location is going to be increasingly valuable in investment decisions going forward. And that needs a sort of a graphical visual representation on a map. So those are the things. But when we got this report, we realized that there was something else a bit more fundamental that needed to be done to make sure that these different things could speak to each other. And that's where this competition comes in. And I think Matt explained quite well the whole idea of having this open data platform that allows this integration to happen and multiple use cases to develop on the back of it, whether it's from a policy perspective or a regulatory perspective or a business perspective, more importantly, because we're trying to create economic value out of it. So that's the reason why we have this competition. We're really excited about it. Then the piece in gray is around the data strategy, but that's more essentially for internal consumption in terms of, I think, we will reach a time, and we're increasingly reaching that time, where this will require a comprehensive, official, formal government response to what is it that this means for legislation and regulation. And that has to come out in the form of some public consultation, hopefully. If there are significant changes to the way the industries run, then that has to be consulted on. And all of that will form part of eventual data strategy. Again, we don't have timelines on this because it depends on some of the outputs from this project as well, on what changes need to happen and what will we consult on in the future. So that will form part of the data strategy. I think next slide is for Stephen, where he talks about what Offgem are doing in this space. But again, the thing I want you guys to take away from my talk is that this for us is a transformational program, and it requires changes to governance, it requires changes to the culture, but it also requires changes to the sort of the technical ability and solutions that we have. And this particular piece today is trying to answer that technical sort of part of the puzzle. And there are other things that we, Offgem and I, BEIS, are working on. So with that, over to Stephen.
Hello, everyone. I think I might be challenging Matt for my voice. Apologise. First of all, I'd like to reiterate the point you've heard from everyone else earlier today as well, but I can't express to you how excited I am to have this work going live. It's really fundamentally important to all the overarching objectives, certainly for the nation, for how we overcome some of the, as the industrial strategy puts it, the grand challenges for the nation. Certainly in Offgems' world, we're really concerned about decarbonisation, protecting vulnerable consumers, not just the typical consumer, but each consumer, and making sure that we deliver all of the energy services that the nation needs, the best value for money that can possibly be achieved. And if we don't have effective control of our information and understanding of the environment that we all live and work in, if all of us do not have that, then we're not going to be able to deliver those things. And without work like this, we are simply not going to be able to achieve those grand challenges. What I'd like to do is, I probably won't use the slides a great deal. There's really just a bit of contextual information for you to take away and to look at in your own time. But I'll talk through some of the themes. But what I'll focus on is to give you some of the economic rationale or approach for why we're doing the work in the way that we are doing it. Very briefly earlier, Matt skated over topics like integration and monopolistic digital infrastructure, and they're things that I think are really of fundamental importance to us gaining control of our information and giving people the data-centric services that they need to make good decisions. So I think if you look at the way, well, let's start actually with the physical grid. If you look back in, say, the previous century, where the nation and many nations have constructed physical energy networks, we've arrived at a point where in the UK we have local monopolies that operate parts of the energy system, but there are no meaningful physical challenges about how we get those physical flows in cases of electricity or gas to pass between the different monopolistic parts of the network, and therefore people get the services that they need. But as we're moving well into a new century at this point, and we are, if you like, starting to build a digital energy system in the way that we've built a physical energy system in the past, we don't have all of those things yet. There have been an emergent rise of digital monopolies across the energy market. The energy system that you know is becoming digitalized, and that's creating monopolistic sources of data for people that needs to be used to make good decisions. But it's not just limited to the energy system itself. We have all of the smart meter data, which comes from single sources. If you then go into people's homes and look at the increasing plethora of assets that are available behind the meter, they are single sources for where that information is available. It requires a complex myriad, as Dinka was telling you about, with how we register and recognize and see those assets. There is a rich and changing complex world of single sources of information that everybody needs to be able to take advantage of, so that we can build marketplaces on top of that and get the best value services for people and enable everybody to rise to those grand challenges. And so this work is forming fundamental first steps to how we achieve that. And the real challenge is not for government to go and tell private enterprise about how to go and run an energy system. Instead, it's for government to make sure that everybody has reasonable access to all the monopolistic digital services that provide single sources of data out so that everybody can then build their supply chain, enrich that information, and offer services on top of it. So that's the kind of backdrop, if you like. What we want to do is make sure that those foundation stones are not just built in silos independently of one another, which is, if I'm fair, probably the way the world has operated to date. But what we need to then do, what's missing, is that interoperation, that integration between the services, so that if there is no marketplaces encouraging people to streamline their supply chains and make sure that people can work between different organizations, that everyone works to a common accepted standard, and that we maximize participation in defining what that standard should be. And that's why you see things like this competition being about open sourcing of the information, making sure that everyone can see what those standards are, can work with them, can inform them, can change them, can make sure that all of the services that we're providing that do not benefit from market forces are done in a way that society thinks is the best way of doing it. And it's scalable and reproducible, and as Matt said, hopefully reusable by nations across the world. So just to give you a bit of flavour about Offgem proper, we've been doing our part of helping progress the agenda that was really catalysed by the publication of the Energy Data Task Force report. It made a lot of these challenges more clear. We think that there's a reasonable chance that a lot of those task force recommendations are actually very useful to things beyond just the energy system, which is what they were commenting on. And you will see that through all of Offgem's statements since, that in all of our regulatory positions, we're making it clear that we are very open-minded about the reusability of the solutions that they proposed. Just to give you a couple of specifics, we, as part of our development of the next Rio price control, so that's for network price controls, where we work with the companies to understand the costs that should be associated with their services, that we've made it clear that we want them to publish their digitalization plans so that everybody has transparency about what new data should be coming forward onto the grid. And then around that, when we are also developing clear best practices about how we expect people to use data. So whilst on the one hand, this competition hopefully will bring forwards all of the practical tools and ways of working to make sure that you can interoperate data between services. We're trying to establish Offgem and BEIS' joint regulatory and government best practices about what the principles that we expect people to work by with their data. So there's parallel streams of work taking place where we hope then we can join these all together and make sure that we have an overall consistent, if you like, an industry enterprise best view about how to work with data where we can't rely on market forces to drive innovation. I think otherwise, I'll just make a mention of the fact that as Offgem ourselves, we're trying to do our part because we, certainly in the digital world, are one of those monopolistic digital services. There's information that we have that the marketplace can't reasonably otherwise gain access to in a way that's quite different to how that works in the physical world, where Offgem really isn't part of the energy network itself. So we are already starting to expose our metadata. It will, we know, be a long process, but what's really important to us is continuous change and gradual improvement so that people are getting value early, so that you can all see how we're working with information, so that anyone who is interested in the data that Offgem holds can give feedback early and help us change and evolve how we do our work so that we do the best job we can as quickly as possible. So if these things are of interest, you've got a lot of links that will take you through our program of work, including, importantly, our homepage for where we will be posting all of our main updates about the progress we make. And we always love getting feedback. We recognise that our position with having some monopolistic privileges means that the only way we can do a good job is to hear what you think. So for our part, tell us what you need most, and then we will also help as much as we can with this competition to make sure that whoever wins, whoever's delivering it, has all of the information that we can possibly give them to help make sure that they deliver the services that everybody needs to be benefiting from. Okay, so I think my last bit, is that now or later? Yeah, it's now. Okay, all right. So this was in the schedule for later, but I'll just do the quick minute on it now, I think, to leave Paul to it later. Matt mentioned earlier that the way this project is formulated follows government's best practices for digital delivery. For government, if you're not familiar, that comes through a subdivision of the Cabinet Office called Government Digital Services. They've been running for a long number of years now, and they have a pretty robust service manual for best practices that government is expected to follow, and Offgem certainly does with its own work. And we think that's the at least appropriate guidance for any of the bidders who are looking at this competition. Matt talked briefly earlier about discoveries, alphas and betas. They're explained in a lot more detail on government's website. It's well worth a read if you're making an application. In light summary, discoveries are there to say, should we do this? Is this the right thing to do? Alphas are there to prototype and test and principally to de-risk your ideas. You may think you've got a good idea, but you could be wrong. So is it the right thing to do? Let's go and prototype and find out whether it really holds water. And then finally, in the beta stage, you have some risks to delivery, as any infrastructural project would, but you are reasonably confident that if you proceed, that you won't reach any fundamental blockers to your work, and you can start, as you go through beta, getting to services that people can use and work with, but they're not yet fully mature. The final stage is a live service, but it's out the scope of this current round of the competition. So we just left it as is. All right, I think I'm all done. Thanks.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's obviously mandatory to say I'm excited as well, because I've never been to Hatton Garden before. What's not exciting is my wife is also in Hatton Garden at the moment, shopping. So I hate to think what's going to happen with my credit card. So normally this part of the briefing, competition briefing, we would have somebody from the SPRI team and somebody from the competitions team to discuss the process of both. Unfortunately, neither the SPRI or the competition team were available today to present this. So what happens in this situation is they dig up the oldest person in Innovate UK who's still got a pulse and hope that they can recall and recount what SPRI is about and what the actual competition process is about. So what could possibly go wrong? And here I am. So I'm Derek Allen. I'm Innovation Lead in the Energy team. I've been around for quite a while in Innovate UK, and it's my pleasure to present this process on SPRI and the overall competition to you. It is worth having a show of hands, bit of audience interaction here. Who's actually applied and got funding through Innovate UK before in any competition? Not many, actually. That's interesting. So of those, have anybody applied for SPRI? 2 or 3. So this actually, although the presentation is actually unfortunately quite dry because there's no exciting whiz-bang slides, it's obviously important for you all to understand about SPRI and what the process is going forward. So SPRI, as Matt had already pointed out, it's actually very different to our normal grant process where we give out a percentage of the funding of the total cost of the programs, be it 50, 60 or 70% to industry or to industrial partners or collaborators. SPRI is actually a contract, and it's all about connecting public sector challenges with innovation solutions. So it's about where government bodies, regardless of who they are, have got a really big challenge, and they want to find a solution that they can't find themselves, so they want to procure it from innovative organisations in the UK. So it's a win-win situation. It's helping public sector solve its challenges, and it's using innovation to provide step changes in what they're doing. Equally, it's accelerating commercialisation of ideas of innovative organisations. It's providing them with a route to market, because as Matt pointed out, the end customer here is BEIS, but beyond that there's a bigger market as well. So there's a sort of end customer lined up already in this competition. I've mentioned about supporting innovative companies. Providing funding to innovators and innovative organisations from Innovate UK actually also provides credibility when you go for private financing. So if you go to raise private finance, it's amazing how much importance some of those private financiers put on the fact you've had an Innovate UK grant or an SPRI contract in terms of giving it that degree of credibility. So these are the only pretty pictures I've got, but this is the sort of programs that we've funded under SPRI. SPRI has been going since about 2009. Over 80 different government organisations have funded SPRI programs with £500 million going out the door. and over between 200 to 300 contracts have been placed in that time. So just examples of what have been funded by different bodies. Innovate UK can fund SPRI directly, so we funded something called Retrofit of the Future. So how do you make old housing stock more energy efficient, basically through outside cladding, inside cladding, underfloor insulation. So innovative techniques about that to reduce the carbon footprint and improve the well-being of individuals. DEC, as it was then, Department of Energy and Climate Change, now BEIS, ran something around energy efficient Whitehall, and that was understanding how to make government buildings more energy efficient. MOD run a lot of SPRI competitions. One of the more recent ones is around the lightweight soldier. So this is about the clothing, the weapons, the battery packs, and all those sort of things, about how you make the payload of the soldier actually weigh less, so they can be more agile and get less fatigued. NHS, again, another big sponsor of SPRI programs. An example there is how do you really reduce the invasive surgery for paediatric, for children, which is obviously quite traumatic. So that was a program looking to solve that challenge, and one that's literally just completing at the moment. People don't think of nuclear decommissioning perhaps as a public sector challenge, but all of us as taxpayers are paying for the nuclear decommissioning burden and the cost of decommissioning our nuclear power stations. So with the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority and Innovate UK, we co-funded an SPRI competition about how do you make that cheaper, how do you make it faster, and how do you make it safer. So SPRI key features, Matt's touched on some of this already. So they're not grants, they're actually contracts for R&D. So you'll get 100% funding. They are in line with EU pre-commercial procurement rules. Whether that matters after the 31st of October, obviously, we don't know, but it does comply with those regulations. We place the contract with the prime supplier or the prime contractor. You may choose to work with collaborators. As one of the previous speakers mentioned, this is about collaboration, so you can choose to work by yourself or you can subcontract to another partner. In terms of how we pay like a lot of contracts, you paid against milestones delivered, but it's quarterly in arrears. That's also worth knowing. So that's the normal Innovate UK terms and conditions, but they are paid against milestones. So if you don't hit your milestones, then we can withhold those payments. The contract terms and conditions are on the website, which I'll run through how you access that in the next few slides. So those contract T's and C's have been in place for some time. I'm afraid they're not negotiable. So they're standard SPRI contracts. You won't be able to come back and say, I don't like this clause, please remove it, because it's the same contract for everybody who applies. The costs that you quote in your bid must reflect the actual costs. You're not meant to include profit. And really they should reflect fair market value. And remember, you're in a competition. So one of the things we look at there is value for money. So fair market value, the assessors will make a judgment on whether your bid is at fair market value. Matt mentioned IP. This is obviously quite important to everyone. IP rests with the developer, and the main contractor. Public sector bodies, so in this case Innovate UK BEIS, will have certain rights of usage, and that's covered in the contract T's and C's. We do encourage you to exploit the IP, so that's the whole purpose of this. It's to help you get your product, whatever it is, to market and commercialisation. So if there's a sign that you're not willing to exploit IP, then there's a high risk, obviously, that won't get funded. Eligibility, open to organisations of any size or type. You do have to be a legal entity. Absolutely open to organisations not engaged in the energy sector. In fact, we're encouraging, which is why we've got a lot of non-energy people in this room. research organisations, that's academia or RTOs, may apply as the lead contractor, but we do make it clear that you do have to have a clear route to market. So that's really important, and you will have to demonstrate that in the application form. As I mentioned, you can work alone as the lead contractor or with subcontractors. So now into the application process. I'm afraid this is where it does get a bit dry, or even drier. So this is talking you through how you actually make the application on the website. So this is a very much helicopter view of the whole thing. This whole process I'm talking about now just applies to phase 1. You'll be given instructions about phase 2, phase 3 later on if you're successful. So it's an SPI competition. We're in phase 1, open to single applicant or with subcontractors. The project size, which includes VAT, please don't forget that when you put your numbers in the application form, up to £160,000 for phase 1. Don't go over that or you'll be out of scope. Anticipated project length, so very short, 6 weeks. I'm going to go through sort of the application bit now and a little bit about the assessment process. So there are actually 7 steps to the application process, all the way from visiting the website, which Matt's already referred to, how you register, the sort of documents you'll see, completing the application form and then uploading it, and bits about the notification and sort of assessment that you'll get at the end of the process. So I'll try and follow those 7 steps, hopefully in the right sort of order. So first of all, visit the website. Quickest way is, as Matt said, is if you Google Innovate UK competitions, you'll get basically the competitions page, which is the page on the left-hand side there. Now, you can insert the keywords, energy data or whatever, and it will come up with the actual competition. Please don't apply for tackling non-exhaust and non-road vehicle air pollution. A, because I'm guessing you might not know much about it, but B, it's also a competition that closed in January 2019. So this is an example because the actual web page didn't go live till this morning. So when you actually go on the website now, you will be able to search for the Modernising Energy Data Access Competition website. So please make sure you are entering the correct competition. It has happened, believe me, where people have entered the wrong one. They didn't get funded, fortunately. So, as I say, that will take you to the web page. Then that will take you, when you find the correct competition, it will take you to this equivalent for Modernising Energy Data. Key things there, you'll see a button, register and apply. But you'll also see a host of tabs there. Summary, eligibility, scope, dates, how to apply and supporting information. Clicking on those tabs is really important because that's where all of the information, sorry, not all, probably 75% of the information you need to complete your application form and follow and find out whether you're in scope and understand the eligibility criteria will be under all of those tabs, as will how to apply. So please read all of that supporting information under those tabs before you even think of applying. So bear in mind that register and apply button. So when you've read all the documents that are online and you think, yeah, this is for me, then that's when you register. So you push that register button and basically you complete a few details, who you are, etc. You'll then receive an email, usually within a couple of days, with a username and password and a login to a secure FTP portal. So it's a secure website, effectively, where we store all of the sort of confidential information. The email you're sent will also contain your application form. So it'll have a template which is your application form. It'll have a unique application number on it. Please don't try and change that. I don't think you can because it'll be field protected. Because that unique application number follows you all the way through from the beginning of the process all the way to if you're successfully funded and beyond that. If you're thinking of submitting multiple projects, which you can do if you want to, please contact our support desk at that website, at the email address there, and they can arrange to provide additional application forms, or they may say you may be able to re-register again on the website. But please contact them before you try to put in multiple ideas. So when you've gone on to the, when you click on the website link, you'll come up with something like this. Again, it'll obviously have the correct title, and it won't have those particular documents. So there are 2 pages on the website. One is the public page, where a number of documents could appear, and then there's the private page, which you'll have to get to via the login button. So depending on how the competitions team set this up, a number of documents may be on the public page. So when you click on the website, it takes you straight there. You may see 3 or 4 documents. So on there you'll find the invitation to tender, which is a formal document that we have to put out because this is a procurement exercise. It just gives you information that Matt's already spoken about, and that's actually already on the competition website, but it reiterates what the procurement process is about and what we're looking for. You'll find some frequently asked questions up there which might be helpful. Most importantly, you'll find the draft contract. So that's the thing you do have to read. I can't remember its length, but it's probably 20 odd pages long. So please go through that, because as I've mentioned, the T's and C's aren't negotiable. So you really do have to be comfortable with that before you apply. As I say, if those documents aren't on the public page of the FTP site, they'll be on the secure site, and to get to that you'll have to log in, press the login button. Just so you've got your application form, you then need to fill it in, go through the questions that are on that application form. Next slide. You label the documents, so the application form should be in a Word document. Make sure it's got your application reference number in front of it, and then save it as a Word document. The appendices, make sure it works with, I think the mic's broken, is it? I'll just stop for a second while we use a handheld. Okay, is that all right? Okay, apologies for that. So, yeah, so if once you've filled out your application form, label it with your unique application number. Appendices, just label it appendix, then with your unique application number. Word, the application form should be saved in Word format, and the appendices submitted as a PDF file. So these are the actual questions that you will be asked. So there are 10 scored questions, and the details of what's required in each question are on the initial competition website. So if you click on, say, the link about scope, eligibility, and the programme and applying, you'll find a description of each of these questions. So market opportunity will ask you what is the market value that you believe you're satisfying. Things like who are your end users going to be, what technical approach are you going to take to this, applying into this competition, what are your capabilities, how are you going to demonstrate it, all the way through to a costing. So what are your costs? There'll be a template in the application form where you fill out a table of costs, and something about the team as well that you're working with. So as I say, all of the descriptions of each of those questions are on the front competition website. So that's why it's really important to read those whilst you're completing the application form. So once you've completed it, basically this is about uploading the application form. So you've labelled it, you've saved it with any appendices that are requested in the application form. So this is when you've clicked on this sort of login button at the top right. This takes you to the secure part of the website. You enter your login details, so you, as I say, you'll have been sent a username and password with the email. You enter those, you acknowledge the little tick box there that acknowledges terms and conditions, and then basically you press the login button. That will then take you to the secure part of the portal, which is down here. There's two tabs on the left, effectively. You press the upload tab, and basically follow the on-screen instructions about how to upload your application form. So that should be relatively straightforward. Certainly any problems with uploading, contact the support desk, either the phone number or the email address that's at the end of this presentation. So that's really the process in terms of applying it. In terms of notifying if you've been successful or not, you'll receive an email, basically. 2 to 4 weeks. You'll receive an email as soon as the assessment process has been completed, within about 2 weeks. For successful projects, we have to do financial due diligence on those. So that can take between 2 to 4 weeks. So we will only issue contracts when the financial due diligence has been completed. And that's to check things like eligible costs, and also that you're a legitimate company and you do really exist. And the project can't start until the contract's been returned to Innovate UK. So just a slide on assessment and feedback. We do always give feedback to all applicants. So in terms of the assessment process, we send these out to up to 5 independent assessors who are experts in the field, who aren't conflicted in any way with the competition or any applicants. They can be drawn from industry or academia. What do they look for? So these are sort of top tips, if you like, but really they're common sense. They're after clear and concise answers to those 10 questions that we've put to you. The right amount of information. Please don't just fill the space with, too much fluffy stuff that really doesn't provide additionality. Don't expect the assessors to read between the lines, because they can only go on what you put in the application form. They're not expected to interpret what you think you're putting over. Wherever you can, quantify and justify detail. That's really important. So if you're saying the market, whatever you do, don't say the market's really big and I'll get a few % share of it, because that really doesn't help anybody. So it's really important to quantify and justify, and show that you've presented a really good, viable, effectively a business case for why we should fund you. This is the contract. We're joining, with you in a joint contract. So we want to work with you in that, but you will ultimately be responsible for delivery. So we want to know that you and the team, if you are working with partners, have got those skills and the capability to deliver what you said. The final question we ask assessors is, do you recommend this project for funding? If not, why not? So if we get the majority saying no, then that automatically gets kicked out. It won't be funded. If they're all green, that's great. They go into the green pot of potential funding. But ultimately, these scores and comments are used in combination with the experts from Innovate UK, BEIS and Offgem to decide which projects go forward. So we have what we call a funders panel, where we have a whole ranked list of projects. Normally we'll go from the top down. I think in this competition, Matt, right, there's the option to adopt a portfolio approach. So you might require a mix of projects, but in principle, obviously the higher the scoring, the better. Get to the top of the list with the top hint. You will get feedback. We make sure that the assessor's feedback comes back to you pretty much unedited, so that we ask them to provide constructive feedback. And the idea of providing that feedback is to understand, and you get it whether you're successful or not. So even if you're successful, you might get tips about how it could be improved, but it's also to help you actually, if you're unsuccessful, perhaps think about what you do next time. They're the key dates. They're all in the competition documents. It opens officially on 21st of October, but the information is open and available now. You just can't register until 21st of October. And that's it. There's the competition's help desk. Details are there in terms of the phone number and email address. Please contact them if you do have any problems. And I think that's it. It's probably Q&A to Jenny.
It is Q&A time. Thank you very much. So stay there, Derek. Can I invite Dinka and Stephen and Matt to come back up here as well? You're going to have to share this microphone to answer the questions. And my colleague at the back of the room is going to come to you guys. So if you have a question, please wait for the microphone to arrive so that the people online can hear your question as well. And if you say who you are, that'd be great. Okay, so first questions. For anything that you've seen today, John, right at the back.
Hi. Hello. Yeah. Thanks very much. Probably a question for Derek. Just looking at the competition webpage, it suggests that any organisation is eligible to apply. So SME, large, public, private.
Yeah, that's correct, John.
That's true.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's not limited to SMEs, even though it's Small Business Research Initiative. Name's a bit misleading. It is actually open to any organisation.
Can I just give a plug that we've got a pile of the EDTF brochures at the back here if anybody wants a hard copy of the report.
That's why John wanted to pretend to ask a question.
Thank you. I felt there was a certain mismatch between the set of scored questions and the assessment criteria, and the fact that what we're applying for here is a 6-week feasibility study come discovery phase. I wonder, would you like to comment on how to interpret the intent of the scored questions in the context of merely doing a 6-week discovery?
I will hand that over to the innovation lead who's leading the programme.
So are you referring to the scored questions on the actual application site? Have you been, or the ones on the slide? Okay, yeah, so do you want to scroll back up to what those questions are, just so we can refresh ourselves? Yeah, so the way that we've sort of structured these questions is they're actually in a fairly standardized format for all the SPRI processes, so our ability to tweak and change these is somewhat limited. So there shouldn't be an enormous amount of discrepancy between how these will be sort of assessed, essentially. So I'm not quite sure I fully understand the question in terms of what the issue is.
Well, for example, market opportunity. Derek referred to, be quite specific about the size of the market that you think you can achieve. The discovery phase is proposing to produce a specification for what is characterized as a common data architecture. That's not in itself a product so much as a foundation for products which will emerge in the alpha and beta stages.
I see.
So I wonder about the applicability of that. Another thought is approach. The discovery phase is to establish the feasibility of an approach. So do you wish us to preempt that by writing about it in the bid? And so on and so forth. So I do think some guidance on applicability in this particular context would be helpful, yes?
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a useful articulation, thank you. So I might hand over to Derek to input a little bit on this, but certainly my view here is that, you are applying for phase one. You are not applying for the entirety of the process here. So instinctively, I would suggest that perhaps 70% of the effort that goes into this is purely dedicated towards your phase one application. Approximately 30% need to allude to what, if you were successful, what some of your future processes might be. But I wouldn't invest 70% of the time in what the future might look like. So just as a high-level guide. But Derek, do you have any other sort of feelings on previous SPRI?
I think that's probably true, because this is effectively a three-phase. But market opportunity, I think if you just focus on phase one, you'll probably come up with there isn't a market. I think you do have to expand on that, particularly on that question about, assuming success, where is this going to go in the future? In terms of the question on approach, I think we do need detail about what you are going to propose to do, because that's actually probably one of the key questions. Because unless the assessors know what your approach is going to be, how are they going to actually score it in terms of knowing how you're going to do what you're proposing. So I would certainly make sure that you do give details of what you think what you're going to do. Oh yeah, just for phase one. Yeah.
Hi, it's Colin Singleton from Accounting Lab. It's a question really, after phase one, are you allowed to bring in new collaborators into phase two? And following on from that, is your phase one allowed to be sort of slightly focused in one particular challenge, knowing that you're going to bring in a phase two for sort of maybe the lower risk potential add-ons that might follow on from that? Is that?
Yeah, so we'll take that one away in terms of a specific answer around the collaborators. So the way that it's structured at the moment is you apply for phase two as part of your end report to phase one, so it's baked into that process. I haven't seen anything which answers that question specifically to say yes or no, so we'll take that one away, and if we can get your details, Jenny, afterwards.
So, sorry, in terms of adding additional partners, so if you go in as a sole contractor on phase one, and so for SPRI, you can normally, in phase two, add an additional subcontractor, but you'll have to make a good case as to why you're adding them in your phase two application.
So just a quick follow-on, it's only for individual companies, not consortia?
The contract is placed with an individual company. If you want to have subcontractors, then you can have subcontractors. But we only place and we only deal with the main contractor. You would have to have any subcontracts and terms and conditions in place with your subcontractors. So a consortium by itself can't apply. It's an individual organisation.
And just to clarify before, you said organizations could be local authorities, for instance?
Yeah.
Okay. And is the route to market seen as BEIS forevermore? In other countries, BEIS-like entities would be buying this service, or is that not what you're expecting?
I guess it's slightly premature to answer that, because it really depends on what the solution would look like. So again, without preempting what the solution would look like, I imagine, so it would be a shame if this was developed and it was nice and then it was a new Microsoft, for example, or an Apple. So this has to be open in that sense. Whether it's on GitHub or something else, I don't know. But the idea with BEIS being the lead customer is that at least that gives us some rights on socializing it. And of course, the terms of that would have to be agreed with the supplier. So I think it's tough to answer your question directly. But for example, I think if it's part of the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, one of the key things we're trying to do in the UK is to be like a lead and at front of all this change. So if there is an export opportunity, then I'm sure my colleagues in the clean growth and would be really interested in exploiting that export potential as well. So I know that doesn't answer your question, but it's probably too soon to answer that, I guess.
Thank you. Hi, Jay Cremak from My Life Digital. Just as you were talking around the regulation side, I was expecting to see something around kind of the personal data regs around GDPR, sorry to say it, but you mentioned about devices on the other side of the smart meters. Obviously a lot of that is data that relates to an individual or certainly to a household. Is the data set we're going to be looking at going to be completely anonymized, or are you also looking at kind of innovation around how individual households and individuals can actually benefit from the sharing of this data?
So all I'm going to say to that is two things. we are still exploring what level of individual data can be shared. So there are instances of, so a key example for us is EPC data, which we consider quite private, but that is openly available, while consumption data is not. So we're trying to figure out how do we do that. And I think one of the things that we want to test with this program is also what level of aggregation, which circumvents GDPR, is still useful to the system. So maybe that's something that this project could also explore, that, okay, fine, maybe an aggregation at street level is still quite useful for our purposes, and it does not compromise individual privacy. So you reach that sweet spot. So that's also possible. So those are two ways of doing it. In terms of the data that we'll supply, that is still TBC, and I would defer to Stephen on that, because Offgem has more of that data. But I'm also looking at some network representatives here who I feel are a key source of that information, so they should be part of this, and because it eventually helps them arrive at something. So that they would be sources of data, but Stephen might want that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not entirely removed from what Dinka was saying, but maybe just to broaden what he's spoken about. Regards to specific data, we've been speaking a good point of contact, but not our only point, is through the Energy Networks Association, as they're the trade body that represent the current operators of energy system, the energy network. So they're definitely very relevant here, and actually it's very relevant for anyone applying to the works. On the one hand, yes, we'll be working with them to make sure that they see the value and want to join in and make sure that their data is available. That makes it easier for you to work, makes it also a lot better for them as well, because they can understand the direction of travel of the industry. So that communication is really important, and it's certainly, I would invite bidders to do their own homework and see what data they can partner and collaborate with and bring to the table. But we'll be making sure that there's data available in the first instance. Now, I haven't really touched on GDPR yet. Appreciate on that note, I think I'd highlight that we're definitely entering a very different world for consumers of the energy system, right? And it's not really this world we've come from where everything flows down to you and it's your own private affairs, and it doesn't particularly affect how the system gets operated, gets invested in. It's very knowable what you're doing with your energy. It's quite measurable just through the meter from the companies that used to be the one and the same, right? That they would send you the power or gas, and then they would also be making the investments. The modern world's looking increasingly different to that, and people at domestic level are now sending things backwards and forwards, importing and exporting across their meters, and therefore they're becoming active participants, and if you like, less like a consumer and somewhat more like a small business, almost. And so that probably comes with a lot of duties, and you'll find other parts of the, so we've got the Energy Data Task Force talking up to but not including GDPR. There's interesting other reports such as the Public Interest Advisory Group, who've done a lot of work about public good uses of data, and that's much more focused on meters, and it takes a modest extension to start thinking about the assets behind meters. If you want to be working with society's energy system, then that probably comes with a certain number of duties, and that gets on to Dinka's point about aggregated data and partial sight. But what matters to this competition is that given that there's any appetite to be trading with the energy system, with society, then there have to be the practical components in place to make sure that that information can flow once people have made the decision that they want it to flow, or that they've signed up on terms and conditions for aggregate versions of that data to flow. So that taps it. You heard me mention briefly earlier about developing an understanding of what data best practice is. What I think you'll find familiar as that comes about in the next couple of months through work that we're, again, Innovate UK, Offgem and BEIS are all doing together. Is that we will be inviting opinions about how to mature the triage process that the Energy Data Task Force pointed out, which will then tackle topics like public good, people's privacy, so that there you've got the governance decisions about what we should be doing with data, whereas this is providing the practical flow of that data given that governance decisions have been made.
Sorry, hi, Rajmant from Bank Energy. I've actually got a question from about a few questions before on the team. I was left a little bit confused. So is it just one company that applies and then they have some subcontractors, because the one company is going to have the one contract with...
Yeah.
Right, so it's not a collaboration with partners. No, it is a main company with subcontractors, and you can add and change subcontractors in phase 2 or not?
Yes, it's entirely up to the lead contractor what they do. So we place the contract with the lead contractor, If you need subcontractors in phase one, then that's up to you. You have to put it in your application form though. You have to make it clear that you are working with subcontractors. If in between phase one and phase two, you think, actually I need some more expertise, you could add a subcontractor. Again, put it in the application form, but the contract only goes to you as the lead contractor. You have to have your own arrangements with subcontractors.
Yeah, because there's obviously going to be an IT element and an energy element, so there'll be one main lead out of the two, and then subcontractors.
Absolutely. We can only, as I say, I can only emphasise one contractor applies. They can have as many subcontractors actually as they want, but given the amount of money that's available, I wouldn't expect to see several subcontractors involved. No, I can't answer that question. It's as many as you think you need.
Hi, Adam Grosvenor from SSEN. Coming back to follow up on a point that Stephen just made on maturing the data triaging frameworks and the presumed open and best practices, is that definitively going to touch on regulatory and legal obligations to DNOs around data protection and data sharing agreements?
The arc of how we're approaching this, and you heard me mention the equivalent for Offgem earlier, is about continuous improvement and iteration. So we don't think it would be good for anybody to overnight suddenly say, thou shalt start doing all of these things, because nobody, frankly, is going to be able to. We need to make sure that we land as efficiently as possible through and transition as fast as is practical and helpful. So with that in mind, our expected starting point is that starting in almost immediately, actually, in the next week or so ahead, running probably just for a couple of months in the first instance, is to get a first cut of what that best practice should look like. I'm sure it will need to change over time. And in the first instance, it would just be publicly available and saying, this is what, as a collective, everybody thinks best practice should look like. But that, at that point, doesn't put it into hard regulatory rules, for example, which is, I think, what you're getting at. But I would certainly work with the view that it probably does need to be applied to hard regulatory rules. So we can, in a more soft way, set expectations, direction of travel, give people time to validate that the rules are correct, give people time to start re-gearing their business models to make sure that they can follow those rules, and make sure that everything's in place. And then I'm sure that we'll get to a point where we say this is the right time for it to become required rules, and even that could be subject to iteration and continuous improvement. So I hope that answers your question.
Morning, Dan Klein, Valtech. So I'm going to be excited as well, Stephen Linkert. I'm going to. This question's aimed at Keith and Matt. So I'm excited by Stephen and Dinker's, and if I summarise it, what you're asking us to do is to think about a hypothesis of what the revolution might be in this space, and then articulate that in this competition. So this is where I'm sort of coming back to a couple of questions from earlier, really. If I think about 1 to 10 on this form here, I think what I've heard you say is you want us to articulate this hypothesis, things like market opportunity and users, in terms of what good might look like for phases 1, 2 and 3. But then I've also heard you say that for things like approach, you want us to focus on phase 1. And I suspect for cost and team, it's phase 1. Given that there's 5 assessors, the thing that I think, if I try and summarise, I think would be very useful from our perspective right now is an understanding of which of those 10 bullets is aimed at the entire competition, phases 1, 2, 3, and which ones you are expecting to see aimed at just phase 1. Because I think that frames how we answer the questions in the competition.
Yeah, so we don't have that yet, I think is fair to say. What I will do is just take that point away and have a chat with a few people internally in terms of how we structure it, because the challenges that we've got are, this is quite a tightly governed process in the sense that there's limited amounts of flexibility, and the standard line is often, well, it's up to the applicant. You need to make a judgment on where you add the 30%, where you add the 70%, and I appreciate that's not particularly helpful. So let me take that away and see what I can do. Jenny, if we can add another note to the list. I don't want to make commitments here and not be able to follow through on them, so I'll take it away.
Hi there, Jonathan Cook from Valtech. A mundane question: is the application open already, and also what date is the submission deadline in January?
So the submission deadline is the 8th of January. You have to register prior to the 2nd of January, so registrations close. The overview of the competition is available on the Innovation Funding Service now, but you cannot apply, as in register, before by the 21st. So it opens officially on the 21st. So they're the key dates.
Matt, just a quick follow-on from the previous question to clarify. I think these hypotheses, you could have a number of them about users of the platform, and you could have ones about those who would procure the base platform, which is the sort of underlying architecture. So I think that's what is a little difficult, is would you love to see in the 6-week feasibility that somebody will use it at the end, like a household, or are you looking at BEIS or somebody like that will use it? And that's what I think is challenging, because this does have so many layers.
So I think I want to draw your attention to one slide that Matt was presenting. So there are multiple use cases, and I think again, I'm not one of these 5 assessors, but or am I? No, okay. And it really is, so there has to be a story around what's delivering value early, which is probably the most exciting use case, and I think that's where applicants can be hopefully creative with that. But in terms of what it enables, I think it should be flexible enough to enable the 3 use cases. So it should help policy, it should help regulation, but it should also help businesses. And I hope that the final solution is not exclusive to one of those 3. So again, without going into the technical detail, I don't know if that is the case, but hopefully if it's just about ensuring data flows, then what you build off of it in terms of what BEIS does with it, or what Offgem do with it, or what industry do with it, should be sort of open. So I think the platform should be robust enough or flexible enough to enable all the 3 use cases.
Okay, thanks very much. There will be another opportunity to ask questions after the break, so if you do think of anything while you're having a coffee, save them up for that session. We're going to break now for coffee, which is just outside the room. I'm sorry it's a little bit cramped here. If you can believe it, this was the only venue available for this date in London, which is amazing. So it is a little bit cramped for the amount of people, but if you grab a coffee and probably come back in here so that we're not all out on the landing. If you have done a Give-Get card, company profile, or want to do one, please grab one of those off Shelley and pop that up on the networking wall. And as I said first thing, if you want to sign up for a 10-minute chat with one of these guys over lunchtime, then again, go back to Shelley and she'll be able to book you in. Other than that, we'll meet back at 12 o'clock. Thank you. So if you could sit yourselves down so the webcast people can see. That's great. Okay, so we're going to carry on now with the last session of today's event. I would like to welcome up Paul Falrad. I'm really sorry. From Offgem, who's going to talk a bit more about the solution architecture that we're thinking of for the competition. Over to you, Paul.
Afternoon. My name's Paul Fialrad, and I am the Enterprise and Security Architect at Offgem, particularly looking at external initiatives and how to align all of those together from an architectural, data and security standpoint. To the non-technical people in the room, me putting solution architecture up on that slide sounds like I'm ready to give you the answer on what needs to be built. But the first part of any solution architecture is actually to understand the problem domain. And this is not an engineering competition where we're saying this is what we want you to build, go away and build it. It's an innovation competition, which means we don't have all of the answers, and that's why we're looking at you to come back with those innovations. So what we're initially going to go through is the same thought exercise that the team went through as we picked up the Energy Data Task Force work and started thinking about where do we go next. If it looks like I'm putting a child's drawing up on the board, I'm afraid that's my drawing skills at work. What we did is quite a common thought exercise when you're not quite sure how to get somewhere, which is to imagine success and then work back. And in order to try and make this idea real in our heads, what we did was we drew out an example of a zero carbon community in 2050. So we've already won. We've decarbonised the country, and here is an example of it working. And then we began to think through, in such a model village, which is actually a place I used to live in South Staffordshire just because the picture was in my head, we started thinking about, well, what would be there and what data would need to be there and shared in order to make that happen. So if you are in 2050, then we've already got a decentralised energy sector. Your house is probably part of the grid. It is now a power station. It'll have renewable energy sources up on the roof, sort of highlighted by the red associated there. But that won't be on every single house. You'll also have communal renewable energy generation going on within your village, which is contributing to your zero carbon community. In order to understand that, we need to understand where we could place these things. So this is integrating in local planning data, nature reserves, environmental impacts, biodiversity studies. There's also the demographics that you need to understand population centres, growth, travel, work patterns, to understand the power needs going forward for this particular community. If you like the village that I was living in, then there'd also be a circumstance whereby you wouldn't know exactly where to place electric vehicle charging points. You don't necessarily have a drive on your house. So your local community car park will be having all of the electrical vehicle charging points in it. It would also know traffic patterns and so on, in order to be able to understand how you would reinforce that grid in order to be able to support it, again with its own charging capability. And as you begin to think through this, you begin to understand that you need data from the Statistics Authority, telling you about the nation and the people within it, understanding how you're going to protect the vulnerable, but also understand how they work, move, grow, travel. The energy sector, of course, construction for any new builds coming into this little country village. The environment, local government, communities, ordnance survey, transport, weather, waste management, all required in order to just make one village in Somewhereshire a zero carbon community. What this then leads you back to is the fact that the energy sector doing this on their own and the energy sector aiming to decarbonise itself will not succeed for the decarbonisation of the nation. This is something we have to be able to do openly, and it has to be all about layers of data that we can correlate, match, link, and use together in order to create the services that get us to this point. This is the point where the architect inevitably ends up drawing some rather simplistic block-like diagrams and to take these ideas and start thinking about capabilities. Again, this isn't something where I'm talking about something you should build. This is just sharing where our thoughts have got to this particular point to think about this is the problem domain and the capabilities that we would need in order to answer the question from the previous slide. So we started by thinking, okay, we know about the Energy Data Task Force. We know we're going to build a data catalogue, digital system map, registration capability out of those recommendations. It's critical to be able to move the energy sector forward. But how do these things work together? And not only that, how do they work together and then make data available out to the other sectors and make it out available to business and to innovators and to the public in order to create the outcomes that we want? And it was there that we started saying there's a fourth box, a common data architecture upon which all of this is built, the foundation of it. Within that, we began to think, okay, so we already know we have the assets, we have the metadata catalog, we have regulatory data that Offgem itself is looking to make available. We know we're going to need things from the Office of National Statistics. We're going to need to think about national reference data sets, geospatial being a critical one. We need to know where these things are, but also things like the Common Information Model around an engineering standard so that we understand how the assets on the grid are connected together. And we need to be able to ingest all of this data, plus other public data that's made available and data that's available from other sectors, and bring that into an architecture that then can make it available to all the uses to which it might need to be there. This data is not going to be identical. It's not going to be in the same format. It's not going to be in the same structure. It's not even going to call the things the same thing. You know, if we're talking about a business, are we talking about an organization? Are we talking about an enterprise? Are we talking about a company? Just something as simple as that, you can call things an awful lot of different stuff. We need to be able to correlate all of that and match and link and overlay this data on top of each other so that we can begin to derive the value that we're after. We need to be able to match that into all of the reference data associated with it. And then we need to be able to put that data out, visualize it, access it, work with it, either from a geospatial perspective, from a point of view of connectivity, where this thing on the grid is connected to this thing on the grid, is connected to this asset, which is connected to these electric vehicles, and numerous other models upon which we are not currently aware. This is the thing when you're building something of this nature, you don't know yet how it's going to be used. If all of this is meant to be enabling innovation to get us to a point in 2050 where we have a zero carbon economy, then that means that things need to be invented that haven't even been conceptualized yet, which means people are going to need to use that data in ways that we can't put forward at the moment. Therefore, we need to put something forward that then is flexible. We can look at it in different ways, using different models and different mechanisms, and it's open, therefore, for other people to come in and say, but I want to look at it this way. Now, this data, this information is up on the Offgem website and also linked out from the competition, where we share openly the thoughts that we've had so far and where we've got to so far in defining what we see as the problem domain aspect of the architecture. I'd fully expect some architects out there to come back and tell me that I'm wrong, and that's great, and we will have those debates. And I want to see what the ideas they'll come back with, because, as I said, we haven't got the answers here yet. What we're doing is laying out what we see as the problem. And that's me. Thank you very much.
You stay there. Come back, Paul. So this is our next chance to ask questions. We can ask Paul some really tricky questions because he tried to get away there. But you can ask questions about anything that you've heard of today, any of the presentations from Innovate UK, from BEIS or Offgem. This is like your last chance now today to ask any juicy questions. Like the last time. There is. I'll just point out that lunch is not served till 1 o'clock. So take this opportunity to ask questions. No? Okay. Oh, yeah, okay. We got one. Thank you, guys.
Hi, I'm Rhys Bowley from Flexis Project. I'm a new face to the room, so forgive me for asking a bit of a newbie question, but we've talked a lot today about working on a platform like this with the end goal of ultimately reducing cost to consumers. And there were a lot of examples given about household residential consumers. I just want to check that when we talk about consumers, are we talking about all the consumers, everyone from the largest industrial customers with entire estates all the way down to a single household owner? Or are you, and the example data set that we've talked about that will be made available as part of this, is that just focused on residential data? What's sort of the scope?
I think emphasis has been put on consumers today, probably driven more by the questions rather than by our intent. So that's probably, perhaps it's giving a bit of a misexpectation of where we're thinking. We've definitely got a very broad view, and at least at a theoretical level, I was trying to make those points earlier around digital monopolies feature. And actually, some of the questions I put to people is, where are the digital monopolies in today's and the future energy market? I don't know, and I have to think about it every day. I've got ideas, but I'm not confident. Some of them might be consumer related, and our questions took us there earlier, but actually a lot of them are industrial as well, or commercial, and that could be both in all different parts of the energy system up and down it. So we're interested across the piece. Probably actually, in reality, I suspect the earlier emphasis and maybe the data that we have available will probably be more focused on the industrial end of things than on the consumer end of things. That doesn't mean to say we're not interested in it. I'm just looking at today's energy market and asking ourselves what information can we credibly make available. It's more likely to be that kind of information. But what we're looking for in terms of innovation is something that would work regardless of which subject matter it is that we're dealing with. And we've used the word platform quite often, and I know sometimes that conjures images in people's minds of a single central thing. That's not a given by any stretch. Of course, if that's the best idea, then that's the idea that we should follow. But the common architectural capabilities could be a single platform. There could be all sorts of weird and wonderful other things, and that's really for you to talk about. Does that answer all of your questions?
Yeah, very much so. My only follow-up, it might be a bit too technical, but the example data set that we described, do you imagine that's a national data set, or have you already identified, say, a particular region or even a smaller area that it'll be based around?
Okay, so there's two ways we've been looking at that. One is that if you take examples of the LEO project in Oxfordshire, then if you've got a circumstance where you can bring data in from a particular geographical zone, then the opportunities for correlating, overlaying and showing how they relate becomes easier. And it should be such that if I'm dealing with a data set that talks about a couple of million consumers in London, then that should be able to then obviously scale up and look at the larger amounts of data. I'm also aware that if you talk to data specialists, part of deriving information out of those data sets comes from having the complete scope. So what we've discussed is trying to attack all of those and make sure that we are giving you as many of the categories of the data that you might run across, and also examples of ones from national data sets to ones that give you that sort of geographic overlay.
Excellent.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Do that to me. I set to go at the back.
Just to sort of follow up on that data question, is synthetic data in scope here? If we just made up a load of data which could be similar to real life data?
So our job is to make sure we can get you some real data sets so you can actually understand the real characteristics inside of it. There will also be some circumstances where we'll want to envisage the data world that should be, and then generate synthetic data sets around that to show how we will get from A to B. Because part of what we would be looking at here, for example, is many of the data sets that come in haven't been enriched with an appropriate locational attribute around some form of standard. So therefore, of course, what we would then have to do is say, well, if we use this, I can show you that, which would mean overlaying some degree of synthetic data over the top. So we know we're going to be looking at getting you some real data, because doing this entirely synthetic would be a totally artificial world. Welcoming the fact that we're going to have to generate some synthetic data sets to prove out certain of the hypotheses we may have, and then trying to look at it from all of those angles. So I think, both is where we're at.
Got one online.
The floodgates have opened.
Hi, we just got one from Chris Cooper online, and it's just to do with sort of resubmission criteria. So can they use the experience of a previous bid? So reuse some of the concepts, but it's a different scope.
Yeah, that's fine. You're allowed to submit the same idea twice to any Innovate UK competitions, so that would be okay.
Okay, and one other has just come in straight away, which is, I'll just repeat it from John Downing. From discussions today, the plan is to run 3 concurrent discovery teams. I assume these will need similar input from both BEIS and Offgem SMEs. How do you plan to juggle these delivery needs?
Yeah, this was something where we went through quite a bit of how we were going to structure this, how we were going to do this in the agile way, how many teams would we be able to support. And part of the reason why we ended up with the other 3 was because we did realise it's a lot of stakeholder management from within us, but we are committed to provide that to all 3 of those teams.
Thank you. Clearly, the Energy Data Task Force report is a foundational document for all of this, and we can see how you are leveraging three important recommendations in your diagram there. But you've also pointed out that you've done a significant amount of thinking and reflection on the task force report. So the question is, to what extent can we rely 100% on the task force report as a source of insight and requirement on this work? And to what extent have you decided that certain recommendations should be deprecated in the light of your subsequent thinking?
So yeah, I mean, I might take that one. First of all, Offgem and BEIS have both stated their support at a high level for the Energy Data Task Force, so that's a good yardstick to begin with. As you will find in the report itself, and as I've been saying earlier today on other themes, continuous improvement, feedback, evolution. The ideas we have today, in fact I'm going to steal one of your quotes, your first idea is wrong, right? So here's the first collective vision about how the energy market needs to change and shape. And it's probably in the right ballpark. And as we all work on it and deliver it, we'll discover there are things that we ought to have done a little bit differently. So entirely agree with the observation. What we will be doing is, and this isn't in isolation, there is a framework of work emerging to modernise energy data as a whole. And so there's I talked about the best practice principles earlier. This is a piece of work, Dinka mentioned that we're making progress on some of the other architectural pieces that the task force recommended. That's also just looking at the task force's world, where they cut their scope to the before the meter, everything inside on the core of the energy system. That is fine for the purposes of a task force report, and it made sense from the way that they were conducting their investigation. But as BEIS, as Offgem, we have to look at the whole of the energy market and do what's the right solution overall. So to get to your actual point in your question, that's why earlier I talked about Offgem being very open about having people be more transparent about their digitalization strategies. You will not be working, whoever wins this competition will not be in a vacuum. There is a whole body of work going on around us, and we actively want everybody to be communicating with one another so that as we all learn, we all iterate and change together.
If I could just add to that particular point, and this is another reason why we're looking at the agile methodology with regard to this particular piece of work, because it's a rapidly transforming and evolving field. There's also a lot of work going on with the Centre for Digital Built Britain about an even bolder long-term goal around a national digital twin underpinned by an energy sector digital twin. And they too are very interested and excited to see this work go forward as some initial steps to try and prove out some of the things that they're saying. So that's why we want to do this work in the open with a lot of engagement from the teams associated with it, while we're making this commitment to put our resources in to support the work that's going on as well, even with multiple teams involved, and the fact that as an agile project, you test and learn as you go. It's not a speck at the front, disappear into a dark hole, produce something, come out and say ta-da, because the energy sector is transforming so rapidly and so fundamentally that this will move during the timescale of this delivery.
Just got one more online from Hisham. The DNOs and TOs hold and maintain substantial data sources that are critical to modernising energy. Will that data be part of this engagement?
So we will be making sure that data is available. As I mentioned earlier, we've been speaking, if you like, the Energy Networks Association works on behalf of those organisations, and they've told us that they're supportive of this work. We need to work out exactly what can be available, but actually one of the things that was learned during the task force's research is that there is actually quite a lot of data already available in the energy market. The challenge is that it's not especially discoverable and searchable. But there is actually an awful lot already out there that can be worked with. So there is plenty to already get your hands on, but it might take a bit of effort looking for it. And we will be making sure that there is certainly some kind of basic package, if you like, of information that should be at your fingertips. I think that might be a question to take away and answer later. Is that fair? But prior to the competition, yeah. So yeah.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I am one of those network companies. Graham Campbell, I am Head of Distribution System Operation and Whole Systems. And it's my job to transform our organisation into a future digital world. And it's a pleasure to be here today. And I'm really interested in the discussion. So I want to make 3 points before I come on to, I guess, the point or the purpose of my speaking. And that 3 things. Firstly, data and digitalisation is critical. We support the output of the Energy Data Task Force, and in fact, it's likely that I will lead the Energy Networks Association data work group on this. But we've got to remember that the network is bound by physical constraints, and that is the laws of physics. Okay, that's unlike some other or most other markets. That has to be considered in all of this. The real issue that I have, or we have as an industry, is how are the distributed energy resources that we've talked about today going to impact the energy system? Because customers strive for convenience, and most don't really consider the electricity network in particular. It just happens. We, in some respects, live in a perfect world with that. An inconvenience like the issue on the 9th of August demonstrate that people are unwilling to accept inconvenience and a loss of supply, despite suffering inconvenience in most other walks of life, like the tube journey we had here this morning and having to get off and walk. First world problems, I guess. Anyway, the second point is we wish to be part of the debate, and we do not wish to be excluded from it. And we want to work with an innovator to solve some of the problems that I've just outlined. There are loads, millions of data points, data sources that we have as a network company, but maybe not to the extent that you think. And again, yes, it's not all in the same format, it's not all in the same criteria between network companies, and we need to align that. But we would be very willing to work with someone in this room or groups of people within this room to see how we make that happen. So the data sets that we've talked about, we can do that, whether it's locally, on a large scale. My chief executive has said to me, why don't you just publish all data we have for Glasgow and see what you get? That's kind of where we're going as an organisation. So that is my point. So if you want to work with us, we would love to work with you. So make contact if you get any ideas, particularly when it comes to consumers and the use of the energy system and how that will evolve. Then we'd be certainly willing to discuss with you. And thanks a lot for allowing us to come along today.
And I think it's probably just worth a footnote that that's the kind of one of the things that's been really nice about the Energy Data Task Force developments, and which has been a very inclusive discussion over the last year, is that kind of messaging is what we've been hearing consistently across the board. I honestly couldn't point to a dissenting voice, and I'm really not trying to overstate that. I think it's genuinely true. I've never heard anyone balk at any of the things that we've been proposing. So what we need to therefore do is keep talking together and deliver together.
Is there a limit to the number of applications one can put in on that last question? Because I know, because you'll have one main contractor, then several subcontracts.
But for a grant, it'd be more than one. But I think for an SPI, you can only apply once.
Yes. And it was really nice to hear that as well, because there's certain DNOs that are very difficult to work with. No, but I mean, they would just sort of, you know, unless you're in the sort of club, they wouldn't really. It's very hard to break into certain DNOs. Not naming any names in this area in particular.
Okay, folks, are we all finished? Lovely, thank you very much, gents. Now it's me. So just before lunch, I wanted to tell you, is that working now? Very quickly, I won't take too much of your time, just want to tell you a little bit about who the Knowledge Transfer Network is and how we can help you with this competition if you've not come across us before. So the
Knowledge Transfer Network is part of the Innovate UK family. So you can see from this slide quite nicely how we all fit in together. At the top is Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and they fund the UK research and innovation. Innovate UK and the Research Councils make up the UK Research and Innovation Group. And within Innovate UK, we have the KTN and the catapults, the Energy Systems Catapult and Connected Places catapults are here today, and also Enterprise Europe Network. But we're all here to support Innovate UK to accelerate innovation and hopefully develop new products and services. So the Knowledge Transfer Network ourselves, our role is to bring everybody together. So we're the kind of the glue, we connect everybody up. We'll bring together industry, academia, the funders, local authorities, anybody and everybody that wants to get involved in innovation. We'll try and connect you all together so that we can develop some really cool products and services. It's all about capturing the value of what we do. We have some great ideas in the UK, but we're not always that great at turning them into commercial success. So Innovate UK was set up to try and help that to happen. And that's what we're here for. If we can bring you together and introduce you to people that can help you get that product onto the market, then that's what we're for. So how does it work? At the KTN, there's probably, I think, about 150 now. We keep growing. 150 knowledge transfer managers, like myself. I lead on thermal energy systems at the KTN. My colleague Louise covers the electrical side of the energy sector. And Stefan at the back as well helps out with energy more broadly. And we tend to have worked in the industry that we're representing. So I myself worked for the oil and gas industry for 40s, and no booing. I've converted, I've learnt the error of my ways. But I worked in that industry, so I understood the challenges of the energy sector before I moved into the KTN and became a knowledge transfer manager. And that goes for a lot of the KTMs. We therefore can come and chat to you and understand the challenges that you're facing, and we feed that back to government, so we can come and do one-to-one meetings with you and see what you're doing, what you're developing, and then signpost you to funding that might be useful for what you need to do next. We also run a lot of events like today. Not just competition events, but we do scoping workshops, consultations, as well as competition events to help government to understand where you would like the funding to go next. We also do large showcase events, and for the Prospering from the Energy Revolution programme, we'll be doing the first of our showcase events in March next year to highlight the projects that have been funded over the last 18 months through the programme. So if you want to come and hear more about where the UK is going in terms of integrated energy systems, then watch out for that on our website. And we do have a website, as I say. We have, all of it is free because we're government funded, so you can register on our website to receive a monthly newsletter which is bespoke to the sectors that you're interested in, so you select what you would like to hear about and that comes out to you. So in terms of this competition itself, as I say, everything we do is free and confidential. So if you wanted to come and have a chat with myself or my colleagues about your project idea, you're welcome to come and do that. We'll also help you to find partners. If you wanted to have subcontractors involved in this competition, obviously you don't have to, you can just apply on your own. But if you wanted to collaborate with people and don't have those particular skills, we can help match you up with someone for that. The competition information, you'll receive an email probably next week now, early next week, with a link to all of the slides you've seen today, a link to the recording that you've seen today. We'll probably send a link out to the Energy Data Task Force, if that's okay, just so that you have all of the information that you need to be able to make a good quality application. As I say, we'll help you find partners. We also offer a free proposal review service. So when you're ready and you think you've got your 10 questions answered, you can send the Word document to us. We'll just do, it's just a fresh pair of eyes to make sure that you've answered those questions as fully as you can before you upload it to the FTP site. And that's all free because we're lovely people. Okay, so that's my bit about the KTN now. So the last thing for today now is to go and have a bit of lunch. But we're also doing our one-to-one chats. So if you have booked a one-to-one chat with Shelley, they start at 1:30 and they're going to be back in here. We're all going down to the lower ground floor for restaurant, for the lunch. So just make sure you're back up here in time for your time slot to come and have your chat with BEIS, Offgem or Innovate UK, whoever you've mentioned. They're going to be talking to you about the competition scope. If you've got any questions about the SBRI and the rules, then come and have a chat to me, because I've probably got more detail on that side. So it's the scope and whether your project idea is in scope is what the one-to-ones are about. So as I say, you can get a lot of information next week off me. You'll also have, when you registered, you were asked if you were happy to share your details in relation to this competition. So we'll be circulating an Excel spreadsheet with everybody who opted in to share their details so that you yourself can help possibly find yourself a partner. You will have put in what you have to offer and what you're looking for, so when you're looking for a particular skill, you should be able to search through that file and find something suitable. If you don't, come back to me and we'll find someone from our much wider database. And that's it. I guess that's it. So thank you very much to everybody on the webcast. I hope that was useful. If you have any questions on the webcast, you'll get all the same information, but if you have any questions, then please follow up with me after the event. Other than that, thank you all very much for coming along today. Hope you found it useful. But let's go and have some lunch. Thank you.